Is Reggie Wayne coaching week 11? Is Pierre Garcon coaching week 12? Like, where does it end?
Can we get some Austin Collie, maybe a little Dallas Clark in there?
Absolutely. No problem. Anthony Gonzalez, call him up, get the edge involved. I'm on board with all this. Maybe Joseph Adai could have a say.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome into Monkey Knife Fight's NFL Preview Show, Week 10 edition. I'm Dan Watkins. Joining me, as always, the great Nick Whalen from Rotowire.com. Nick, you know, we got further proof this week that the NFL is just the greatest reality show out there. I've never seen an introductory press conference where the newly hired coach says his initial response to getting hired was, "Why am I a candidate for this?" But here we are. Jeff Saturday is now the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, man. What do you think of this move? I mean, it is just fantastic.
In terms of pure comedy value, this is one of the funniest things that has happened in the NFL in a very long time. The NFL tends to be a very buttoned up league, especially in comparison to the NBA, for example, where it feels like there's always crazy drama going on left and right. We get it every now and then in the NFL, but for the most part, it's kind of a boring league. Like the coaches all kind of seem the same. All the teams are kind of the same. It's not often that you have an owner just going completely rogue like Jim Irsay is here and hiring a franchise hero.
It's just fantastic. I mean, I wonder if he called Peyton Manning to be the offensive coordinator.
I would imagine that maybe that's the long game here. Is
But
that they're trying to lure Peyton Manning maybe into some sort of managerial role in the long term. But yeah, I mean, the press conference the other night, that was hands down the best press conference in any sport that I've seen in quite some time. The why am I a candidate for this is one thing. They asked him, what was your first reaction when you got the call? Shocked would be an understatement. It's unbelievable. I mean, what happens like if the Colts come out and get waxed by this terrible Raiders team this week? What happens next? Like, is Reggie Wayne coaching week 11? Is Pierre Garcon coaching week 12? Like, where does it end?
Can we get some Austin Collie, maybe a little Dallas Clark in there?
Absolutely. No problem. Anthony Gonzalez, call him up, get the edge involved. I'm on board with all this. Maybe Joseph Adai could have a say. I think, though, this is actually now playing, kind of against the Raiders. Like, you can't be the team that loses to the team that has a coach who never even thought he would be coaching football, right? Like, this is suddenly, it's a high pressure situation for the Raiders.
That's what I was going to say to you. I mean, I kind of wanted to flip that on you and say, if the Raiders somehow lose this game Sunday, you have to leave Josh McDaniels.
Yes.
You have to. Right?
Well, he's already had a couple timeouts after some losses where like he's delayed to his post-game presser because he's getting yelled at by Mark Davis. This would be the last straw. This would be a completely inexcusable loss. I think he's probably fired if they find a way to lose this game. The Raiders, by the way, did just place Darren Waller on IR. So obviously he will not play this week and won't play for several more weeks. That whole situation has been a disaster. They're still really banged up this week. Unfortunately, sadly, I don't think we're going to get maximum comedy value out of this. I think we tend to forget that, there's a full experienced coaching staff around Jeff Saturday. He did designate a first-time play caller, but it's not like Jeff Saturday is just in full control here and everything is on him. Like, I would love for this to be like I saw somebody say it's like a storyline from Friday Night Lights where some high school coach gets called up to the NFL. That's totally legit. I would love for this to turn out like in maximum hilarity, but I think the Colts, I don't know if they win this game, but I don't think it's going to be this like abject disaster, where they're just coming out and looking like a JV team. Like it's still the NFL. There's still a lot of good players and good coaches on that staff. So again, unfortunately, I don't know we're gonna hit peak comedy value.
Yeah, I don't even think, are they getting, I think the spread's less than a touch. It's 6. So
it's
the Colts
6.
The Colts are getting 6 in this one, but you bring up high school. Jeff Saturday was a high school coach, went 20-16 during his time coaching at Georgia High School. But I love Jim Irsay defending the move and just throwing out just random words, basically, at this point, saying, quote, "We're the 4th winningest team since 2000. That means in the upper quartile of winners, we're in the top quartile of that upper quartile." Those are just my kind of analytics right there from Jim Irsay. And then he goes on to say that they're not tanking. This is not a move to tank and try to get up to the top of the draft, and that they could win 6 of their last 8 games. But my question for you, Nick, do you have a favorite just like weird NFL or just any sport coaching hire of all time?
This obviously has to be up there. I think the Nets hiring Ime Udoka, had they actually gone through with it, would have been an all-timer. Unfortunately, they put the kibosh on that one. Man, I have to think. That's a good question. I mean, like I was saying earlier, like in the NFL, you just don't see stuff like this very often. You know,
I got
guys like this don't get hired. You could go back to like Jim Tom Sula. There were some guys that it felt like were just kind of doomed from the start. I mean, Urban Meyer, unfortunately, probably in that basket as well. John Gruden with the Raiders. You forget he was still coaching this team last season. That feels like it was 10 years ago that whole scandal went down. In the NBA, I would have to do some more thinking. I'm trying to think of who like the worst coaching hires have been in the NBA. But what about you?
Isaiah would probably be right up there for NBA. He was
that was pretty rough.
But yeah, I think we could do this entire segment just like on the Raiders or even the Miami Dolphins. They both had some classics. Dan Campbell, when he was the interim head coach. I mean, now he's kind of turned it into this like just like lovable with Detroit. But like back when he was the Dolphins coach a couple of years ago, like he was just grade A tool bag every single week. Tom Cable for the O-line coach becomes the head coach after Lane Kiffin, that was a disaster on its own. But anyways, Tom Cable punched out one of his assistant coaches at one point, which like that's just peak Raiders and peak Al Davis to me. But here's a fun one from Major League Baseball. Ted Turner, who owned the Atlanta Braves. Back in 1977, the Braves were on a 16-game losing streak. He tells his manager to take 2 weeks off and like go reassess things. And he like names himself the manager for that time period. He ends up only coaching one game or managing one game rather. They lost 6-1. The manager's back the next day. They ended up winning, but that's just like one of my favorite. And like, that's like almost something I could see Jim Irsay doing because he's that crazy, but like, no, man.
Oh yeah.
No, man, give me the headset. I'll get in there and call a couple plays, like get right in there. But I'm surprised he hasn't done that.
We might see it before the end of the year. I think we're seem to be heading in that direction. I mean, that's what's kind of scary / reckless / interesting if you're not a Colts fan about this whole situation is all of these directives, from benching Matt Ryan to hiring some random dude who used to play for you to coach your team. These all seem to be coming from the top, and Chris Ballard is out there at this press conference being like, yeah, we had some battles about this one and, Jim won out. It's like, yeah, he's the owner. Of course he won out. It just seems to be like, you don't really see this very often in the league where one guy is literally making all of these decisions. And I think at this point, he's so desperate to win games and prove that he's running a viable, competent franchise that, I don't think we see Jeff Saturday get fired if we're being serious the rest of the way. But I don't know if they go like 0-4 in his first 4 games and they're just completely non-competitive. Would we really put it past Jim Irsay to make another in-season coaching move? Like, has a team ever fired 2 coaches in the same year?
No, I don't think so. But
I mean, like the Raiders, for example, they fired Gruden and then they fired Bisaccia after the season. I'm talking 2 in-season fires. I don't think that's ever happened.
No, I not off the top of my head. I can't tell you there. But there was a great still shot though at one point where Jim Irsay all of a sudden like brings up Michael Jordan during the press conference. Yep. And Chris Ballard's eyes and just like the look of like, what is this man next to me saying right now is just absolutely fantastic. You just I can't get enough of it. But let's move on. We got to talk about the golden elbow of Josh Allen. He may have a UCL injury, which is like something we see out of pitchers in Major League Baseball. He might have to get Tommy John, maybe, like you've even seen that report out there. I know he didn't practice on Wednesday this week leading into that game with Minnesota. And Nick, I mean, things were just going so well for Buffalo, right? That like they're odds-on Super Bowl favorites. You knew something was going to happen because that franchise is just cursed. Whether it was the Bills getting in their own way, which we've seen a couple times this season already, but I mean, this injury, man, like only like a cursed franchise like Buffalo, this could happen to.
Well, we'll see. I mean, things were going well. They were also coming off of a loss to the Jets and a pretty discouraging showing, I thought, against Green Bay the previous week. So I think they were starting to kind of show some holes maybe in the foundation in Buffalo. But you're right. I mean, I don't know that this is going to end up being something that ends Josh Allen's season. I think everything we know about him, everything that feels like it's on the line for this team this year, unless he cannot throw a football, I think we're going to see him push through it. Now, I would not be surprised if he misses this week. If you've been tracking the line in that game, it has been a steady decline over the last 48 hours, especially. It opened at 9.5. I'm seeing it all the way down now to Bills -3.5. We still don't have a decision on Josh Allen, although he did not practice at all on Thursday. It's certainly feeling like he's not going to play this week. But I don't necessarily think this is like a season-ending injury at this point. But for this week, it throws everything into a tizzy. I mean, I think this was a really good spot for Buffalo bouncing back at home. Hard to see that team losing 2 games in a row, especially with how sloppy they were in the second half against the Jets. But all of a sudden, I mean, this is a really, really difficult game to handicap, because if it's not Josh Allen, you have a pretty competent high floor backup in Case Keenum, a guy who's obviously very familiar with the Minnesota Vikings. And the gap between Josh Allen and Case Keenum is huge, but that's mostly because Josh Allen is so good. Like, Case Keenum is very capable of game managing at a high level and still potentially winning this game. So when it comes to making your picks or betting against the spread, I know that's not necessarily what we're doing here at MKF, but this game is kind of breaking my brain right now.
Yeah, I mean, we have this like weird potential reverse Minneapolis Miracle thing going on here with Keenum and Stephon Diggs. But we did put out a question to our Twitter followers, and a lot of people want to know about this game. We don't have lines up yet for this one, but like, how does this impact Stephon Diggs? Like, his number's been right around like 90 the entire season. If Allen, even if we have Josh Allen at 70%, which way would you lean with Diggs this week?
I would feel better about Josh Allen playing. It's like with an elbow injury like this, it doesn't really, it kind of seems like you can either throw the ball or you can't, like comparing it to, say, Justin Herbert, like when he had that rib injury, you're like, this guy could get knocked out at any point. Like, if he just takes one hit, his day might be over. He might be playing differently because he doesn't want to get hit. Like, with Josh Allen, I think if he plays, I don't really change how I view Stephon Diggs. Either way, I'd be pretty comfortable starting Stephon Diggs in fantasy. I'd still be pretty comfortable going more on whatever his prop ends up settling at on MKF, because at the end of the day, I don't think, this wouldn't be like a Malik Willis situation where Buffalo is like, treating him with kid gloves and they're only letting Case Keenum throw 10 times. Like, they're still going to run their offense. I think they're still comfortable with Case Keenum. And obviously the offense has a much lower ceiling with Keenum than it does Josh Allen, but I still think this could be a productive team. Minnesota's been an average defense. It's not like you're going up against the Eagles or the Cowboys or a team like that. So I still think there's reason to have some upside with Stephon Diggs. And like last week, Josh Allen played that whole game against the Jets and threw for 200 yards. The week before, threw for 218 yards. It's not like he's really been lighting it up these last couple of weeks anyway.
Right. And I think even after he suffered that injury, I think he threw like the 5th longest pass of all time, something like that, so like the arm strength was still there.
Right. That's what leads me to believe that maybe this isn't like, a torn UCL. Like, you can have some damage to it. I don't think you can huck the ball 70 yards downfield like he did. I believe that was the play that Sauce Gardner ended up breaking up at the end. But yeah, you're right. That came after the injury. Now, Gabe Davis, I don't know if I feel comfortable starting him this week. I think I would go less on whatever his monkey knife fight prop ends up being as well. Like that I think is where you start to draw the line. Like, if it's Case Keenum, Stephon Diggs is so good that he's just going to get his no matter what. But I think it starts to hurt maybe those secondary options for Buffalo.
And then on the other side, Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins, we have people asking about them too. JJ's numbers pretty much been like 100 every week there on MKF. We don't have the line yet, but do you feel comfortable with him hitting the century mark in this one?
I do. I think the lack of touchdowns has been the main complaint for Justin Jefferson, but for the most part, the yards have been there week in and week out. The targets, he's getting double-digit targets most weeks, and this Buffalo defense is good, but the secondary is banged up. I don't think it's quite as elite as we kind of just assume it is. And we saw Garrett Wilson, kind of going wild against this very secondary last week. So if Zach Wilson and Garrett Wilson can do it, I think Cousins and Jefferson can do it.
And how do you feel about Cousins? I mean, I think he's got his shirt on for this one after dancing on the plane and all that. And hopefully we don't have to see Adam Schefter with his shirt off ever again, by the way, after that, recreating that.
I got to say, Shefty, better body than I would have expected.
Yeah, I will give him that, but we still don't need to see that ever again.
No, we don't. But, it wasn't as disastrous as it could have been.
Fair enough. But what do you think about Kirk? Like, let's throw his line like right around like 275.
275, I think I would go less on that. That's a number that he has eclipsed, let's see, twice this season, and once by only 2 yards. And that was week 1 against Green Bay when the Packers were just not playing defense in the first half. So no, I don't see it being that kind of game for Cousins. I think it's a winnable game for the Vikings, especially if Josh Allen doesn't play. But this is a team that, controls the clock. The offense seems to run hot or cold. I don't really see them, throwing the ball all over the yard on this secondary. I think they're more of a balanced team. So even though I like Jefferson, to get into the triple digits, I don't see this being anything more than kind of your average Kirk Cousins day, which this season has meant, I'm trying to find his yards per game. I mean, basically like 220, 250, somewhere in that range. I don't really see him approaching 300.
All right, very good. Let's go through a couple of these other Twitter vote suggestions from some of our followers. Newly acquired Jeff Wilson for the Dolphins. He scored last week. His rushing prop 45.5 against the Browns. What do you think about Jeff Wilson this week?
This is a really fun game all of a sudden. I think this could be much like last week's Dolphins-Bears game. I think it could be high scoring, two teams with completely opposing styles. I will go less on the yardage prop for Wilson. I like him to get in the end zone in this game. Maybe it's through the air like it was last week, but that Cleveland defense kind of showed us something. Last time we saw them was that statement win over Cincinnati in primetime. They get a week to kind of rest and recover, and that defense seems like maybe, just maybe, it's turning it around after a few rough weeks.
All right. Orange Blazer 28 wants to know about Tyreek Hill, 101.5 receiving yards for Hill. You're already signaling more on that one. I'm even hearing like Tyreek Hill MVP discussion for this season.
Sure. I'm willing to entertain that. I would vote for Tyreek Hill over Tua. I'll tell you that. A lot of this for me comes down to Denzel Ward, who was back at practice on Monday. That's a really, really good sign. He'd been in concussion protocol for like a month. That was kind of a scary situation. Some other key injuries on defense for the Browns. JOK is still questionable. They have a couple other cornerbacks, including Greg Newsome, who are questionable as well. So we're still keeping an eye on that secondary. But overall, man, I mean, Tyreek Hill has just been unbelievably good. I don't think people realize like he's averaging like 8 more yards per game than Cooper Kupp was last season in what was a historic receiving year. So Tyreek Hill, I mean, very well could approach 2,000 yards this season if they keep this up, if Tua stays healthy. So I love the more here.
All right, very good. We got another fun one in the NFC North. We got the Bears and the Lions going at it. DFS Dan 4494 wants to know about the Sun God. I'm on Ross St. Brown, 69.5 receiving yards at Chicago, more or less.
Is this your alias, DFS Dan?
Yeah, this is me.
Nice try, DFS Dan. No, I like this. I like this one. I think we could get another. It feels like the Bears are just going to play these games in the high 20s or the 30s every week now. I mean, they have a terrible defense. They sold off their 2 best players on that end of the field at the deadline, but they're also improving on offense at the same time. And I mean, Detroit's offense, I don't think it's ever going to reach the heights that we saw those first 3 or 4 weeks of the year where they were leading the NFL in scoring. But to me, the reason that dropped off is Amon-Ra St. Brown got hurt, and he just hasn't quite looked like himself since. However, last 2 games, he's got 11 catches. He's got 19 targets. The big yardage hasn't really been there, but I think this is a great spot for him against a Roquan Smith-less defense for the Chicago Bears. So I'll go more on that.
Then on the other side, you got Justin Fields, who PK Pautu, I think is how we're going to go with that. 21.5 fantasy points for Fields. As we kind of talked about, this Bears offense has all of a sudden become fun, which I never thought we would say this year about the Bears. But Justin Fields, what do we see out of him on Sunday? He's kind of doing it all.
Yeah, I didn't think we would be saying that at all this year or maybe even this decade about the Chicago Bears, but they have flipped the narrative. Over the last 5 weeks in fantasy football, Justin Fields has more fantasy points than anybody. He's been a top 3 quarterback. If you're talking fantasy points per game, obviously they have not had their bye week during that span, but he's averaging like 26 fantasy points a game. And I think now this is his best matchup of the season, right? You get this Detroit defense coming in, feeling good about themselves. They didn't really even play that well last week against Green Bay. That was more about the Packers. But yeah, I love Justin Fields this week. I mean, the ironic thing is, like, in some fantasy leagues, he was a scrap heap guy. So like you might have, it's completely conceivable that you could have like Patrick Mahomes and Justin Fields on your roster. And strangely, that's like a tough decision these days. I mean, Justin Fields has been that good over the last few weeks. So yeah, I love the more here.
All right, very good. And we got one more here. Cortland Sutton, the Denver Broncos are at Tennessee. 55.5 receiving yards for Sutton. Are you riding with the Broncos this week?
I don't think so. No, we'll see what happens with the quarterback situation in Tennessee, but that Titans defense, I think that was the story coming out of last week. They lost that game, but they basically played without a quarterback and took the Kansas City Chiefs to overtime. Despite Patrick Mahomes throwing the ball a ton, I think that defense stepped up in a major way. And going from facing Patrick Mahomes to facing Russell Wilson in this Broncos offense, I feel like it is going to be a huge advantage for Tennessee. So no, I'm going to go less here. I mean, Cortland Sutton has not even come close to this number in each of the last 3 weeks. I mean, he's got 6 total catches in that span. I don't even think he has 60 yards combined in those 3 weeks. And that's against the Jets, the Chargers, and the Jags. Really only one good defense in that sample. This feels like another game that's like a 16-13 final.
Yeah, I think what we learned last week too is, or just reminded of, is that Tennessee's a bad matchup for Kansas City. I think they beat, I think what, 5 out of the last 7 times they played or something like that.
They held the Chiefs to 3 points last year. Yeah, it's something that they do defensively, just kind of frazzles Andy Reid.
Yeah, Vrabel's got it going on, that's for sure. Anyways, moving on, let's talk about what might be the best game of the weekend, and it's happening in Germany, in Munich, Germany. It's the Bucs and the Seahawks. It's going to be a 9:30 Eastern time kick. Nick, last week we see the Bucs maybe kind of putting things together, figuring it out. They lead that fourth quarter comeback. Tom Brady with his 55th career game-winning drive, now the most all time. He's finding Scotty Miller just over and over again, kind of doing his best Julian Edelman impression there going on down the end there. And then Tampa Bay comes out with the win. Did that say more to you about Tampa figuring it out, or more that the Rams are just kind of a mess?
I don't feel any better about Tampa Bay at all. I think they basically just got so many chances that finally they were able to convert one drive at the end, and all the Rams had to do was just get one first down, and that game is over. I came out of that feeling worse about both teams. I think the Rams are a complete tire fire. And again, the Bucs have just played the same game like 6 weeks in a row. And, they got bailed out against Atlanta on that roughing the passer call. They got bailed out by the Rams, not being able to finish off this game. I think the Buccaneers, the Rams, and the Packers are just shockingly similar teams in the way that they play week in and week out. I don't think Tampa has discovered anything. I love this spot for the Seahawks. I think they're being dramatically undervalued. It's not a true road game. Both teams are traveling actually about the same distance. There's not even really a travel advantage for Tampa Bay here. And the Seahawks are 2.5-point dogs. I mean, that to me, that just makes no sense.
It's up to 3 now. So it's a
oh, my goodness. Oh my goodness.
It's moving quite a bit, but let's talk about some of these MKF lines. We got Tom Brady at 280.5 passing yards. He's reached 281 in 4 of 9 games. Finished with 280 on the dot last week. 36 completions though to get there. Would have had more if Mike Evans could, catch the damn ball once in a while. Seattle ranks 20th in the league in pass defense. They're giving up about 225 per game. What do we see out of Brady this week?
I've kind of been smashing them more on his yardage props this year, just because the Bucs start every game trying to establish the run. They run Leonard Fournette and Rachaad White into the line for like a couple 1-yard gains, and then they don't run the ball the rest of the day. Tom Brady has all these games with 40, 50 plus attempts because they just cannot run the ball, and they have to completely abandon it. And you're right about the drops. I saw a stat today that, unsurprisingly, if you've watched the Bucs at all, they are far and away the league leaders in terms of points lost due to drops. Like there was some like advanced number that said that they have lost 53 points this year based on drops. As in, if those balls are caught, they would have 53 more points. So it's borne out. Like Mike Evans, I don't know if he kind of has the yips or what. Like he's still been a decent fantasy receiver just on volume, but the thing with the Bucs is they have no big playability at this point. Like for them, like a 9-yard gain is the equivalent of like a 30-yard gain for other teams. Like they just don't have any explosion despite having 2 really good receivers. Leonard Fournette, we felt good about coming into the year. It's just a mucked up operation that I don't really see getting fixed. And with all that said, I like the more on yardage for Tom Brady, because once again, I could see this being a game where they can't run and he has to throw the ball 55 times. And it's just, over the course of 60 minutes, if you complete 35, 8-yard slants, eventually it's going to add up.
Yeah, they have no big playability and they have no red zone ability either. I mean, maybe they have something going with Cade Otton now, but that still remains to be seen. Geno Smith on the other side, 250.5 passing yards is his more or less. He's reached 251 in 4 of 9 games. The Bucs, though, they rank 5th in passing defense, Nick, allowing just 192 yards per game. The highest yardage total against them was Aaron Rodgers with 255 back in week 3. What do we see out of Geno this week?
Yeah, that explosive Green Bay Packers offense led by Aaron Rodgers that I don't think did anything in the second half of that game. I'm going to go less here. I think this is a game that Seattle, if it's up to them, will try to control on the ground. And this Bucs defense is still good against the rush, but not nearly as good as it was earlier in the season. You lose Shaq Barrett for the year. That's huge. As long as Seattle can find a way to control Vita Vea. I mean, he really wrecked that game for the Rams on a number of occasions last week. If they can keep him in check, I think they can run the ball on this team. The Bucs are basically an average run defense right now in terms of EPA. So I like the less on Geno Smith, and Maybe I'll like the more on Kenneth Walker if we have a number for him.
All right, here, let's do this a little differently with these two receivers. Who goes for more yards on Sunday, DK Metcalf or Mike Evans?
I feel like Evans is somehow the safer option, even though I feel dramatically worse about that offense. I just think the volume is going to be there with Metcalf. It's been a little more hit or miss, a little more big play dependent. So I'll go Evans.
All right, very good. I do want to touch on this Cowboys-Packer game. I don't think we have any lines up for this one on MKF right now, but I did hear you on your Rotowire XM show the other night talking about how like Vegas is finally giving up on Green Bay. They're getting 5 points here on this one. Is it time that we just start picking against the Packers until they prove otherwise?
Yeah, and unfortunately, that time started 5 weeks ago, and I was late to the party as well. I backed the Packers last week. I thought it was a great spot. Our guy John McKechnie locked in the Packers 3.5 as his best bet of the week. I cannot wait to chide him about that on our show later today. But yeah, I mean, that was the final nail in the coffin for me. I mean, not only did Green Bay lose the easiest game on their schedule, I think they are now the worst team in the division. That's not even up for debate to me at this point. But not only do you lose that game in just horrendous crushing fashion, but you also lose like 4 key pieces to injury. Like Rashawn Gary tore his ACL, Eric Stokes carted off the field, Romeo Doubs carted off the field, not going to play this week. Like half the offense is on the injury report. Elgton Jenkins did not practice yesterday. David Bakhtiari did not practice yesterday. I mean, it feels like this team just keeps finding new ways to hit rock bottom. And the only thing that's been working in their favor for most of these last 5 or 6 games is they've had some pretty easy matchups. I mean, you're playing the Commanders, you're playing the Jets, you're playing the Giants, you're playing the Lions. Now you get the Cowboys. That defense coming off of a bye. I like you said, Vegas is finally backing off of the Packers, and I think rightfully so.
And what's the reception going to be for Mike McCarthy? Aaron Rodgers is saying he hopes everyone cheers. Yeah. Which is kind of weird because didn't Aaron Rodgers basically run him out of Lambeau?
Somewhat, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that part was maybe a little bit overblown, but yeah, I think there was some resentment there. I don't know what it's going to be. It's interesting because I think if the Packers were a really good team like we thought they would be this year, I think there would be more animosity. I think it would be we got the cool new coach. That's our old coach. These are rivals now. Though it's going to be such a sad, sullen mood that everybody resents this Packers team so much right now that I actually think McCarthy might get a warm welcome. I think it's a nice distraction, if nothing else, from what's been going on the field.
All right, very good. I think the biggest question with Dallas right now, though, or the biggest thing they need to do is just sit Ezekiel Elliott down, even when he comes back. Feed Tony Pollard. The dude is just such a better running back at this point. I think Zeke is at the end of his career. The wheels are kind of just falling off here at age 27, which is just crazy to say. But or he just needs a fresh start. He needs a fresh start.
I mean, honestly, he's just doing what he's always doing. Before the injury, he's on pace for another 1,000-yard season. This is kind of who Zeke is at this point. I don't think he's washed up. I just think, I think Jerry Jones loves him too much, and for better or for worse, it's kind of holding the Cowboys back. For fantasy, if we're talking player props, it's so much easier when Zeke is on the sidelines, and you could just say, all right, Tony Pollard, this is a smash spot for him. He's awesome. If Zeke plays in this game, even if he's limited, that just it mucks everything up.
It does. I have both of them on my, and every week I've been doing this game. Basically, I was rotating them at one point because it's but now it's just feed Tony Pollard and make this simple and go in there and get a big win. Let's talk about Sunday Night Football here before we wrap up. We got the Chargers at the Niners. Should be a fun one on Sunday night. 2 quarterbacks, Nick, Justin Herbert, 240.5. He's reached 241 in 6 of 8, but this San Fran defense is still good despite how injured they are, giving up just 199 yards per game. And I think the reason this number is so low, though, is just because of that Chargers wide receiver room.
Yeah, I mean, they found a way to make it work last week, but that was against the Falcons, a terrible pass defense. They should have lost that game. Falcons went up 10-0. Marcus Mariota missed Kyle Pitts on what would have been a game-winning, wide open long touchdown late in that game. So I think we come out of that feeling okay about the Chargers, but this is a really bad matchup, I think, on both sides, really, for the Chargers. Bad rush defense against maybe the most dangerous rushing attack in the league now. Sounds like Deebo Samuel's going to be good to go for this game. Obviously, McCaffrey in the mix as well. I'm going to go less on Herbert. I think this could really be a game where they suffocate him, and the Chargers are kind of out of options at receiver. The only case for me for the over is, if they fall behind early, this might just turn into one of those games where they just have to throw on every down. And I think that bodes really well for Austin Eckler.
And then on the other side, you got Jimmy Garoppolo, 245.5 is his number. He's reached 246 in 3 games this season. Chargers defense giving up about 206 per game.
I just kind of default to going more on Jimmy G in a spot like this. I do not trust the Chargers defense. There's still some major injuries. Like, the Chargers are the only team, I think, in NFL history to go into the bye and somehow come out more injured. Like, they received no help whatsoever from getting a week off. I think this is a good spot for Jimmy G, and I think we're going to see a San Francisco offense that is more big play friendly going forward.
All right, very good. The two running backs, Austin Eckler, 21.5 fantasy points. Nick, in PPR formats, San Francisco is giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs at just 14.9. What do we see out of Eckler? I know you were saying probably a big week.
I think so. I mean, that's a really good stat that you threw out. That's kind of making me second guess. I mean, the other side of that is Austin Eckler is the number one PPR running back in fantasy by like almost 30 points over number 2, Joe Mixon. So I think if there's some kind of competing forces here, I'll side with Eckler. I mean, his stat lines have been pretty ugly a lot of weeks. If you just look at the rushing, you're like, oh my God, it was a disaster. And then he has 11 catches for like 65 yards. He's not really ripping off a ton of big plays. He's just compiling a ton of catches every single week.
He had the one called back last week, that like incredible circus play, unfortunately.
Yeah, he had that. I mean, he had the fumble late in that game. Just a really weird game from a fantasy perspective for him. But with no Mike Williams, likely no Keenan Allen, I think Austin Eckler is basically going to have to be the Chargers offense. And that just means a ton of swing passes, a ton of screens, a ton of checkdowns. So I think that continues. Even against a good defense, he could have 10 or 11 catches in this game. And all of a sudden, that's 10 or 11 fantasy points. So at that point, pretty attainable to get to 22 and hit that more.
All right. And then on the other side, you got CMC at 23.5 fantasy points. I'm going to bring this same stat up for you, Nick. In PPR formats, the Chargers rank 31st when it comes to fantasy points allowed to running backs at 27.9 a game. CMC going to go off Sunday night?
I feel like I'm taking too many mores, but yeah, right. I mean, he has to. He's averaging 21 fantasy points per game in PPR. A lot of that, the majority of that, obviously, came as a member of the terrible Panthers offense with Baker Mayfield. He's going to be in a good spot. I think the potential downside is like, how did McCaffrey and Debo in some ways kind of work against each other? They're similar in terms of their playmaking, but honestly, they're using Debo more as a true receiver this year. Like, he has not had many games where he's carried the ball more than once or twice. So I think these guys could work together, and I like them more on McCaffrey. All
right, very good. Anything else this week you got your eye on?
Well, we'll see about the Jags. They found a way to bounce back last week. Did the unthinkable, came from behind and won a 1-score game. I think this is a pretty rough spot for them, though. Now you win that game, that's all well and good. Your reward, you got to go on the road and play a Chiefs team that feels like it's kind of ready to bust out after a disappointing game last week.
Yeah, what's the line on this one? 9.5?
9.5. It's been holding steady at 9.5 all week.
Yeah, I think I might take KC. I think that's a 2-touch.
Yeah, I think if that gets to 10 or 10.5, I think twice. But if it's in the single digits, you got to go KC.
All right, very good. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit subscribe on our YouTube page at Monkey Knife Fight, and good luck on your contest this week.